Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our National Mentoring Month webinar entitled The Impact of Mentorship Throughout Your Professional Journey. Let's get everyone settled just for a little bit to make sure we're all logged in, and then we'll get started. And I do want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Before we get started, I will be giving a brief intro about the National Research Mentoring Network, and I'll introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Marcela Hernandez. Founded in 2014, NRMN is an NIH grant-funded initiative whose entire purpose is to diversify the STEM workforce. We do this by providing researchers across all career stages in the biomedical, behavioral, clinical, and social sciences field with evidence-based mentorship and professional development programming that emphasizes the benefits and challenges of diversity, inclusivity, and culture. Our program achieves that through mentorship, networking, and professional development through our online networking platform, MyNRMen, which currently has over 21,000 mentors and mentees. We encourage you all to visit our website, nrmnet.net, to learn more about our resources. NRMN is happy to have our speaker join us today for today's webinar. Dr. Marcela Hernandez's current role is to design and implement programs to enhance and support postdoctoral scholars, including a special focus on those from underrepresented backgrounds. Her scientific training and research in biochemistry and molecular biology focused on control of gene expression at the transcriptional and post-transcriptional levels. She's also the mother of twin boys, one of which has learning disabilities, which has made her active in the area of support and advocacy of students with disabilities at the K through 12 and college levels. Dr. Hernandez became a scientist thanks to an awesome PhD mentor whose enthusiasm and love for science made her want to become a researcher. He taught her how to think like a scientist. This made her realize the importance of good scientific training and mentorship. She believes that this is the single most important factor in becoming a successful STEM professional. She has also cultivated a mentoring network that has helped her grow professionally. Dr. Hernandez is very passionate about mentoring and hopes to help the next generation of STEM professionals to retain their love for science and to maneuver around the traps that are responsible for the leaky STEM pipeline. NRMN is delighted to provide this opportunity for everyone to participate in this webinar and have your questions directly answered by Dr. Hernandez. We'll be offering a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, so we encourage you to type any questions you may have in the Q&A feature or the chat down below. And from NRMN, we want to give a special thank you to Dr. Hernandez for making this webinar happen. And now I will pass it over to her to begin the webinar. And let me stop my screen.
Thank you, Johnny. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, can you see my slide? Okay, yes, great. So thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction. And so, yes, I am very passionate about mentorship because it really changed my trajectory in both science and professionally. So I want to start by just sharing with you that the most important lesson I learned during my scientific training was this phrase that actually my colleague Dina Meyer-Stroud from Vanderbilt University actually synthesized really well, which is mentorship first, science topics second. It really crystallized for me after my experience with my PhD advisor, who was a tremendous mentor, of how essential and fundamental this piece was for me in order to get to the PhD level. And then later in my career, I realized that this mentorship is important all throughout your entire professional life. It's not just during the time you're a student or when you're a postdoc. No, this mentorship is important for the rest of your career. And it really makes a huge difference in how you feel about your job, how satisfied you are with your career. And it really helps also to achieve this work-life balance that we're all trying so hard to do. So I wanted to start by kind of sharing my own story and how I got to where I got. So I started out thinking when I was in high school that I really wanted to become a scientist. I was particularly interested in the molecular biology field. And so to execute this plan, the first stage was to get my bachelor's degree in molecular genetics. And as many students, I got involved in undergraduate research. And during that time was that I started receiving mentorship. I joined a lab where they happened to have a visiting professor who was doing a project, and he agreed to kind of take me under his wing. And he taught me the very basic techniques. And not only that, but we had so many interesting conversations about science, about life, even about politics. It was very educational. And after he left the lab, then I was mostly mentored by postdocs and graduate students in the lab. And with these interactions with them, I really solidified my plan that I wanted to go to graduate school. And they gave me a lot of information about their own experiences that then would make me think about how I was going to navigate this experience. So then I applied for a biochemistry PhD program, and I started out, and my original plan was to get a PhD, but I actually cut my journey short in that lab, and I received a master's degree. And at that time, I think I did have a thesis advisor, but I would say that most of the mentoring and training I received came from postdocs in the lab. This was a very large lab. It had 20 people in them. Half of them were postdocs. And I think it was a very overwhelming experience for me. And at some point, I decided that perhaps I wasn't PhD material, and maybe it would be best to get a master's degree and move on with my life. And so I did, and I became a technician. And I worked as a technician for a few years. During that time, I had twin boys, as I was mentioned in the introduction. And being a mother really changed my outlook in life and my priorities. And then the lab that I was working on lost its funding, and I had to find another technician job, and I landed in the lab of a new assistant professor who wasn't even sure that he wanted to hire a technician. And after some negotiations, we agreed that I would kind of work for a couple of weeks and see how things were, how we both felt about it. And after the 2 weeks experience, we definitely figured out that this was a great deal for both of us. And I started working as a technician. But in a few years, I actually ended up being a PhD. I transitioned from being a technician to being a PhD student in this lab. And during this experience, I not only had the mentorship of my PhD advisor, but I actually had a whole mentoring network that really made it possible for me to graduate 4 years later with a dozen or so publications. So this concept of mentoring network, probably many of you have heard about. There's a lot of different handouts like this one that I'm showing you here, different versions of this, but all of them basically put you at the center, and it points out all of the different things that you need, and also has spaces for you to fill out who is going to help you with all of these things. And I didn't really have this map. I didn't even know these maps existed when I was going through this process, but I did, without knowing it, assembled a mentoring network, and all the people in this network were really contributing to my development in different ways. And so, for example, here's my mentoring network. I'm here in the middle. This is me as a grad student. I had my PhD advisor, but I also had a whole number of faculty at my institution. Some of them were in my department. Some of them were not in my department. Some of them were professors in my graduate program or collaborators with my lab. Then I also have my lab mates. They were also mentors in their own way. Particularly they were the initial postdoc that was hired when I joined the lab. He was really my go-to when my PhD advisor wasn't around. Other Ohio State students that I were part of my network who also helped me in different ways, not necessarily with techniques or learning about science, but more about navigating situations that I was encountering. Faculty outside of Ohio State, that was super important. And there was something that my advisor made it a point that all of us would have someone from outside Ohio State as part of our dissertation committee. But I had, in addition to that person, I met other people through collaborations the lab had and through people that I invited as a graduate student to our departmental seminars. I also had virtual mentors, like the ones that NRMN provides. I signed up for a couple of virtual mentoring opportunities, and that was also very useful. One of those people were working in industry, and I was really curious about what being a scientist in industry was like. And so that interaction was extremely useful and very educational. There was also the staff that worked in my department, people in the office, in the research center office, people in the greenhouse. I was in the plant biology lab. The people who did the IT support for all of us, they were also mentors. They were also helping me in many ways to achieve what I was trying to achieve. And of course, my husband was also part of my mentoring network. And so, like I said, I didn't really set out to form a mentoring network. This kind of happened. And I think it happened in part because of my PhD advisor being so thoughtful about all of the things that we needed as students. And he understood that having more than one mentor was important, and also having connections within and outside the institution was important. And because mentoring encompasses all of these things that are here, training, motivation, advice, success, direction, etc. It's really important to understand that not one person can give you everything. And so this is why it's so important to assemble a network and not just rely on your advisor or just one mentor to guide you through your process. And also kind of do some self-reflection about my two experiences and trying to get my PhD, and understanding why my two experiences were so different. Here on the left are the things that I experienced the first time, where I said that it was a big lab. It had stability. It was well funded. The faculty mentor was tenured, so I didn't have to worry about them not getting tenure and then figuring out what to do. And this all was based on advice that people had given me when I was an undergrad. But what I found was that I was extremely intimidated to approach my faculty advisor. And because of that, I was getting very infrequent feedback. We also have lab meetings where only one person in the lab would give a presentation. And when you have 20 people, that means that you present every 20 weeks or more if there's no holidays or things in between. So I was making progress very slowly because of my inability to ask for help and because of the infrequent opportunities for feedback that I had. And this advisor was pretty hands-off. And the other problem was that we were a very self-sufficient lab. We had all kinds of equipment. We have our own dark room. We had our own ultracentrifuge. We had our own things that normally people share in a lab setting, like there's one centrifuge for the entire floor or something like that. We didn't have to share. And because we didn't have to share anything, we were isolated. We didn't have any reason to interact much with the rest of the people on our floor, let alone department. And so I had very little or no interactions with other labs. And this combination of factors really made it so that I was actually feeling all the time defeated. I felt like I couldn't make progress fast enough. I started doubting myself. And what I define as a low scientific self-esteem is like, I really didn't think I was cut out to be a scientist, because I found it very difficult to work in these conditions. And I figured these were the conditions that everybody was facing. And I was seeing other peers in the lab, other graduate students who were taking 6-7 years to graduate. And I hadn't budgeted 6 or 7 years. I was thinking 5 at the most, because I knew I wanted to have kids, and I didn't want to have them while I was a student. And so for all these reasons, I remember vividly being in a library preparing for my candidacy exam, and all of a sudden thinking like, I just don't want to do this. And I closed all the books and I went to my advisor's office and I said, look, I'm not going to make you waste your time, and I'm not going to waste mine. Let's just wrap this up with a master's degree. I don't think I want to go for a PhD, and I don't want to do this exam. And he said, okay. He didn't fight me or try to convince me not to, which I took as a sign that he also thought I wasn't cut out for this. And in retrospect, I realized that part of the problem here was that I was very easily intimidated and insecure. And when I think about this, I think about the fact that I was 22 years old when I started this. And so at that time, yes, I was very insecure about myself in terms of my capacity to become a scientist. But then fast forward to when I joined the other lab where I ultimately got my PhD, I found a faculty advisor that was new, enthusiastic, and untenured. And that's important because he didn't have tenure, he understood very early on that in order to get tenure, he needed grants and he needed publications. And in order for that to happen, he needed his lab to be very productive. And so for that reason, he decided to invest a lot of time in developing his students and postdocs, and in my case, technician. And it was amazing, the kind of time that he spent with me explaining not only how to do a technique, but also explaining to me why we needed to have the controls that we needed to have, how we determine those controls ahead of time, how do we interpret the data later. And this then evolved into more sophisticated conversations. Once that part was, I understood it and I mastered it, then we went into more hypothesis creating conversations and understanding models. And we had a lot of time in front of a whiteboard drawing models and having conversations. And that is how you really learn to be a scientist. So I was extremely comfortable approaching my faculty advisor. I would get daily feedback, and sometimes several times a day, and sometimes at my request. It wasn't that he would show up on my bench, typically at least once a day, but a lot of times I would go into his office, which was right down the lab, and his door was always open, and I would have to go in. I'm sorry, I have a question, or I'm sorry, I need to ask you this. And he was always very willing to have these conversations. So he was also more of a hands-on style person, and that was good for me. For some people that might feel more as micromanagement, but I actually realized that if I was going in the wrong direction, I needed to know this sooner rather than later. And so I really appreciated the fact that he was always available and ready to answer any questions. Not only that, but this lab was smaller and there was more interdependence among the labs on the floor. We shared equipment, we shared space. And so it was more interactive and collaborative than my previous experience. One of the things that my faculty advisor did was establish a weekly seminar for all the other labs on our floor, and everyone in the lab would have to speak at least once a year. There was like a list of people that we would go through, and then we would start over once we got to the person at the bottom. And this list included faculty members, graduate students, postdocs, undergraduate students, and technicians, or any other type of staff, research staff that labs had. So everyone had to present their work. And this actually was how I started forming that mentoring network, because a lot of the faculty on the floor were aware of what I was working on and also got to know me more due to these conversations after the weekly seminar, or they would send a student over to talk to me about some technique that they wanted to learn from me, or I would go to their lab to ask them for advice on something. So that really helped build these relationships that later, as time went on, these people also became mentors. Sometimes I would stop them in the hallway and ask them questions, things that I wanted to run by them. I wanted a second opinion about something, not necessarily about an experiment per se, but maybe about more philosophically about science in general, academia, or careers, things of that nature. And during this time, I really felt inspired by my mentor. And I also realized that I actually did have what it takes to become a scientist. But at this point, as I mentioned, I was already a mom. I was older, more mature. And so I wasn't afraid of asking questions. I wasn't afraid of going against my advisor in something. So for example, many times we have conversations about experiments where he wanted me to do this like huge experiment. I would say, I'm sorry, but I'm not doing that, because I have not done this technique before. I'm not going to start with a big experiment. I want to start with something small, figure out how to do it, and then I'll expand. And he would be like, no, I know that you can do this. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it, because I know that I'm going to make a mistake and then we'll ruin this whole thing. And it would be a negotiation. And sometimes I won the argument, sometimes he won the argument. But the fact that we actually had a conversation and I felt perfectly comfortable saying no to something, it was really great. And I think this is what the term psychological safety means. When you are in a work environment where you're not afraid to speak up or to have an opinion contrary to the one of the person with the most power in the room, then these kinds of things can happen, and people feel they belong, and they're much more productive because they're in a place where you feel valued, you feel that your opinion matters. I also was doing a lot of mentoring up, which I didn't know what that was, but now in retrospect, I realized that I was doing this without knowing it. So the definition of mentoring up, and this is taken from this source here as a chapter on mentoring up that I really recommend that you look up, is the mentee's proactive engagement in the mentor-mentee relationship so that both parties mutually benefit from the relationship and move forward towards an agreed upon purpose or vision. So basically, this means the mentee has to also guide the mentor in how to be a better mentor for the mentee. And I was doing that all the time without knowing it. I would say things like, the way I learned best is XYZ, or I would say, I would like to change the way we work on this to this way, because this way I can be more productive, or I can do, be a better collaborator, or whatever it was. I was basically explicitly giving to my advisor my needs, a list of my needs, and even my own solutions to address those needs. And then he would do what I was asking, or he would have a modification or whatever. But the fact was that our mentoring relationship was really a two-way street, and that's how it should be. And I think that this is a key component of mentorship that sometimes happens organically, but I think if trainees know this ahead of time, it really helps them a lot in getting out of their mentoring relationships what they want. So it's really important to also understand that this relationship is going to evolve, and you have to continue to learn about each other in this relationship. It's also good to know what your mentor's priorities and pressures are, and it will help you understand when is the best time to do something, what is the best way to communicate something. And that was something that I also was doing without knowing it, because I think in part because of my previous role as a technician, I was kind of his right hand. So he was always telling me when his grants were due, when he was planning on traveling, how many talks he was going to prepare. And so I knew when his, peak times of a lot of work were, and I knew how to dance around that to get what I needed from him. Also, this idea that you cannot assume that your mentor is going to be able to figure out your needs all the time. Sometimes they might understand something better than you about you, and they'll say it. But for the most part, they don't know exactly what is it that you need. And if you actually articulate that to them, then you can save yourself a lot of time. They will welcome that, because then they will strategize in how to give you the mentoring that you need to address the needs that you have. And so again, during this process, not only was I getting the benefits of a great mentor, but I was also learning how to be a mentor. Because again, I reinforce this, the mentoring relationship is a two-way street. You have to mentor up, and the mentor has to mentor down, and both of you have to learn from that experience and learn how to become both a mentor and a mentee. And in fact, as I went through my career, which I kind of have two phases in my career, my research phase and my administration phase. During my research phase, I started mentoring undergraduates during that time that I was a technician all the way until my postdoctoral training. I also mentor graduate students later on. And once I started moving into administration, I started having a role of interacting more with postdocs and trying to serve that population. So I started mentoring postdocs and graduate students in this new role in a different way. I wasn't teaching them techniques or lab procedures, but I was helping them navigate their own experiences in research environments. And also I was helping them thinking about what their future career would be, what were their passions and where were their skills, and how could they actually find something where they would be really satisfied with their career. So I also became a SACNAS chapter advisor during this time, and I'm still their advisor. For those who don't know, SACNAS is a society of underrepresented minoritized scientists. And there are many universities with chapters of this organization. Actually, we started one in 2013, I think. and it's a chapter for both undergraduate and graduate students. And as an advisor to the chapter, I also serve as a mentor to many of those students. And I also became an RMN virtual mentor, which I highly recommend to people. I think postdocs, for example, should really think about doing this. It's a great opportunity, and it's a great way to exercise your mentoring muscles. And I have found this to be very rewarding experience. I have mentored undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, and even colleagues through this program. So I highly recommend it. Also, in my administration phase, I also had a lot of mentors. And these were supervisors, colleagues inside and outside my institution, faculty members, and most recently, I formed what is called a no committee. I found myself always saying yes to a lot of things, basically because I wanted to do them, and not realizing that I just didn't have the bandwidth to do everything I wanted to do. So I read a piece of advice to faculty to form a no committee that would be 3 people who are about in kind of the same area professionally that you are. There are 3 people that they care about you, and you could just send them like a note and say, I've been asked to do X, Y, and Z. I really would like to do it. What do you think? And they help you make the decision. And so there is a vote out of 3 people. And I've actually done this more recently, and it's been really helpful. Sometimes they tell me yes, sometimes they tell me no. But this is another way of finding mentoring through your colleagues. So all of these support system has been really crucial for me to not only do a better job, but also feel better about what I'm doing. So the need for mentors remains for the entire length of your career. And because I feel so passionate about mentoring, other things that I've done at my institution is to start trying to foster a mentoring culture. Because the reality is that very few people, or not very few people, but I would say there's a lot of people who didn't have a mentor like mine in my PhD mentor. And I think part of it is that there's not a good match between mentor and mentee. Part of it is that a lot of our faculty have never really had the opportunity to think about what is to be a mentor and what are the best practices. And so NRMN actually at the beginning had some grants that they gave out, and one of them was given to the Big Ten Academic Alliance, and they started providing facilitator training for faculty and staff in the Big Ten, and people who attended committed to facilitating workshops on their campuses, workshops for faculty about how to become a better mentor. And I attended one of these trainings, and then I coordinated the attendance of more people from my institution, both faculty and staff. And we now have 20, and then later after this program actually ended, we invited the trainers to come to our campus and train even more people. Now we have 29 facilitators that are working on this, putting together these workshops. And since December of 2017, we have done 34 workshops in 2 campuses. We have trained 322 faculty members, 141, excuse me, postdoc scholars. And since 2019, the Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning in the university has created an endorsement in research and mentoring for people who participate in this and in these workshops if they go through the full 10 hours of training. And this is how we are hoping that the more and more faculty and future faculty we train on these best practices, that we will see better mentoring across the institution. And also for postdocs who probably will not end up in our institution, but they will be good mentors wherever it is that they end up. And more recently, we have a university-wide committee called Advancing Mentoring, where we're trying to come up with policies and resources that are centralized so that we cover all aspects of training for all populations: undergraduate students, graduate students, postdoctoral scholars, faculty, staff, and making sure that we have centralized resources so that people can always go there and find what they need. Get also maybe train the trainer sessions. We're still trying to figure it out, but we also came up with a philosophy, a mentoring philosophy for the university. And I think that this is kind of another component that will help the improvement of the mentoring culture. And lastly, I also been doing a lot of mentoring app workshops because, as I mentioned, this is a very needed skill for mentees. And I've been giving this to graduate students, undergraduate and post-bac students, as well as postdoctoral scholars, because again, it's really important to understand of the two-way street nature of the mentoring relationship. I also want to say that NRMN is a tremendous resource. If you haven't explored their website, I think you should. They have excellent resources, and this program, the virtual mentoring program, is amazing. I also recommend the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM. It's both a guide, a book, and you can also find their online guide, and it is very interactive and has a lot of tools and a lot of good resources, and also has all of these things are based on really solid research that's been done on research mentoring, and all of those references can be found also in this report as well as in the online on the website. So that is it. That is what I wanted to present, and I'd like to have more of a conversation now about this topic. I think, again, mentorship is super important, not only as a trainee, but for the entirety of your career. Is as important to become a good mentor as it is to always be seeking out mentors and be a good mentee. And I'm going to end there. I'm going to stop sharing and take your questions or comments. Okay, I see here in the chat. Yeah, somebody said that they love the mentoring map. Yes, I think we need to use this more and more and encourage trainees to use it. One program that we initiated, unfortunately, it kind of got interrupted with COVID, but we had a program for postdocs where we would pay for them to go to lunch with a faculty member from outside their department. It could be a seminar speaker, whoever. And the idea was to incentivize the growth of their mentoring network. We also had a map that we would give at postdoc orientation, and then we asked them to send us an updated map like 3 or 4 months later, and we would see if their mentor network had grown, and if it had, then they would win some sort of prize. We had to we stopped doing both of these programs in part because of COVID, but I'm hoping that they will restart soon. But I think it's any way that where we can make these maps more part of the training and people really start using them, I think it would be very beneficial for trainees. I see somebody commented on SACNAS. Yes, SACNAS chapters are great. If you don't have one in your institution, figure out how to start one. I think it's a great home for the minoritized students who are in science fields or in STEM fields in general. And what I find is that this group becomes part of their mentoring network and it's part of their support system. Any other questions or comments? So how did I overcome the imposter syndrome of speaking up as a student? Yeah, I think one of the things that helped me was, well, one, I think as I became more mature and as I understood life a little better, I realized it's not the end of the world. If you ask a question and maybe somebody might think it's a dumb question, but I also used to tell my own mentees, like, there is no stupid question. You know, I'd rather have you ask me a ton of questions than make a big mistake that could have been avoided. So, but one thing that I realized, for example, when I was a graduate student, sometimes I was sitting in seminars and I would hear professors ask questions that I thought were dumb. I was like, that is a dumb question. Like, we already covered that. Or it would be a question where it would be evident that that person hadn't been paying attention. And once I figured that out, then I thought, okay, well, if there's professors that are doing this, heck, I'm going to ask my questions. That was one way I was thinking. That I kind of rationalized it this way. I'm like, well, everybody can make mistakes, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. And I have to say that my mentor was very critical on this because he would also say things like that. He said, nobody knows everything. Asking questions is the way you're going to find answers. So don't be afraid of asking questions. And this is part of how he fostered this psychological safety in our lab meetings and even in the seminars. And so I think that had a lot to do with it, is having someone who reaffirms you and who believes in you. That I think is really, really critical. It's also very important because once I kind of understood that, you know, that I was capable of doing science, then yeah, I really didn't have as much hesitation, but I also I didn't talk to myself in negative ways anymore, because that's what a lot of times perpetuates this imposter syndrome, is where you are constantly telling yourself things that are putting you down, and you're really hard on yourself. And I think a lot of us who enter PhD programs, we're really hard on ourselves. So I think we need to be more positive. And once, you know, I turned that corner, I wasn't talking to myself in a toxic way, or I wasn't thinking that I wasn't capable or something. If I didn't understand something, it was because I had to ask a question. I had to clarify something. And once I did that, then I was able to move on. And I think that really helped me. And again, I think my mentor had a lot to do with this transformation. And that's another reason why having a good mentor is so important, because we know from research that imposter syndrome is something very common in trainees and research. So this is why it's so important to train faculty to understand how their actions can have so many ramifications and so much impact on the development of trainees not only in what they can produce, but also how they see themselves. Any other questions or comments? Well, I do want to encourage everyone to really reflect on your own experiences, and especially for those of you in the audience who are graduate students, undergraduate students, or postdocs who are still training, this concept of mentoring up is really, really important. I think it's very, it's something that we are not focusing too much on as we train graduate students and postdocs. But I think it's, again, it's an essential part of the mentoring relationship, and it will really help you improve your mentoring relationships and make them more effective with all your mentors. And so there are resources out there like that chapter I mentioned. I think there is a curriculum to teach mentoring up that is available at CIMMER in the University of Wisconsin. I forget what CIMMER stands for, the Center for, I forget, but just Google it, CIMER. They also have lots of resources, and maybe, I think you can link to a lot of them from the NRMN website.
All right, did anybody have any last minute questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, again, we want to thank Dr. Hernandez so very much for participating in this webinar. This was such an important discussion, and this was the last webinar for National Mentoring Month. So thank you to everybody who participated in this month. NRN is happy to share that, you know, the power of mentorship and what it can do in any career stage that you're in. So, and we look forward to hosting more National Mentoring Month webinars next year. So we hope you join us then as well. But thank you all for attending, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.